When I was a kid, I read Percy Jackson, and then I read every single book I could get about Greek mythology. I didn't care if it was a Goddess Girl series. I didn't care if it was a nonfiction book from the library. Anything I could get my hands on, I would read. Then my brother and I attended Latin summer camp, which is a summer camp where you learn about ancient Rome. I read the Odyssey in middle school as part of my curriculum. Then I took Latin in high school and went to state and national convention, where you compete in academics, art, sports, and other things all centered around classics, where you pledge to uphold the traditions of Greece and Rome because that is where our heritage, the heritage of the mostly white people in that room, supposedly started. I wrote the state newsletter for my chapter of this organization. Then I went to college, and I took an ancient archaeology of democracy class and Latin classes, and then some literature classes that made me think about classical reception. And then I actually went to Greece for 2.5 weeks to study ancient religious sites with a group of college students. And 2 people I'm very close with are on track to becoming archaeologists. They're in grad school, and both of them were on digs this summer, the summer of 2026. I say all this to say, I liked Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Does that show I'm unintelligent or part of a film bro cult that corrupts any rational brain, or that I'm stupid in some way? Because how could someone who knows what The Odyssey is supposed to be like this Hollywood bastardization of history and culture? Well, let me tell you a story. Hey, hi, hello, my name is Anarchy, and this is my YouTube channel where I do whatever I want, including leaving the internet for months after I got a bunch of new subscribers from a video that I felt bad that I didn't put the same amount of time, effort, and consideration as I do into most of my other videos. Hi, if any of you are watching, I'm sorry I haven't posted anything or said anything or thanked you or responded to comments. I got more than 10 comments and had to have my mom read the rest to me because I got really scared. Now, before we continue, I need to say I'm aware that a lot of people like The Odyssey. The Letterboxd is proof of that, and that's my proof of what the people have to say. But I'm in the judgment by scholars zone of the internet, the more left-leaning, pre-knowledge of the Odyssey corner of the internet, and before the film came out, they had a lot to say, and now that it's out, they have a lot more to say about The Odyssey. And hey, before any of you historians say, what the fuck are you dressed like that? I know this is historically inaccurate. This is a bedsheet and I don't want to have my titties out, okay? Before we get into the rest of the video, I need to state it up here. Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey is not an accurate representation of Homer's Odyssey. It is not a loyal interpretation of the source. But I don't believe that that is the same thing as saying it's bad. But that's what happens when work gets adapted. It will inevitably be compared to the original, and people will decide whether it's good or bad based on how close it is to the original. Which happened before the film came out. People were already saying it was going to be bad because it didn't look how it was supposed to. This video is about the Odyssey, but it is also about adaptation, because I think we can learn a lot by interrogating our thoughts on adaptation and how we judge whether a piece of media is good or bad. And also, sort of the pitfalls of trying to adapt something in the first place that has fans. And I think The Odyssey is the perfect source for this because it is something that has been told over and over again. It is the ultimate text that we've interpreted, that we've adapted. We are going to talk about white supremacy and the gross pride of Western tradition. And to do that, we gotta talk about adaptation and the pitfalls of that, and we gotta talk about ownership. Every critique I've seen about the Odyssey, to me, stems from a sense of ownership over the Odyssey. There are dumbasses who are upset that Christopher Nolan cast a trans man to play a man. Oh my god. It's almost like trans men are men. There are people who are upset that Lupita Nyong'o one of the most beautiful women in the world, was cast to play Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. And these people are upset because they feel like the Odyssey is part of their culture. It is their white Western history, and it is being perverted and bastardized. They feel like Nolan is shitting on that white Western legacy, like he has ripped their copy of the Odyssey to shreds right in front of them. These people believe that the Odyssey is the most refined text, and it is their white Western heritage. These people who are complaining are usually have not a drop of Greek ancestry in sight. And they don't care that Matt Damon, who I saw described in a post as the most Bostonian man to ever exist, is playing Odysseus. They just want to be racist. Then they use classics to justify their racism, because we have constructed the idea that the ancient Greeks and classics is like almost a utopia, and our like utopian Western perfect idyllic white world. We as white people, that is our intellectual heritage and property, and that is our culture, which is something that's baked into the foundation of America. And I saw comments about the film before it came out where people were judging it and saying the Odyssey is basic literature, and if you haven't read it, you're basically uneducated and stupid, and this is a piece of text that must be studied because it's so important. And I'm here to say you studied it because the curriculum in your classroom was written to uphold white supremacist narratives, not because your teacher wanted you to learn about oral tradition and the culture of ancient Greece and the nature of storytelling. The Odyssey is great, but you weren't taught it because it's great. These people haven't actually studied the history of the ancient Mediterranean enough to get a full picture of what it might have looked like back then and what cultural norms and things were like back then, because they weren't like they are today. Then there are historians who, by the way, you guys, I understand you the most and your upsetness, and we'll get to that. And these historians take umbrage with the costumes and the dark colors and the sets and the historical inaccuracy in that way. The actors matter less than if the time period looks accurate, is spoken accurately. And they feel slighted when their work gets ignored. And to be fair, I get that. Whenever I see a corset scene in a movie where she's pulling it tighter, I get pissed off. Historians do have reason to be upset because the aesthetic of the Odyssey is playing into a history of whitewashing and decolorizing a very colorful place with a culture different from ours. And I think it's fair to point out what the Odyssey movie is playing into.
Hi, it's Editing Ann. I realized I didn't explain why these aesthetics are white supremacist because I think you could take a whole entire video to get in the history of it. To have these clean white statues that ignore the original paint that was on the statues, and to even scrub off the paint to make them look more white and pristine, is trying to sell an idea of whiteness and purity of ancient Greece, and to have these statues be as white as possible when they originally were not is whitewashing and decolorizing the very colorful history to more align with this clean white aesthetic that aligns itself, with this idea of whiteness being goodness, all of that.
And it is something to be criticized. I think that the white supremacy and the whitewashing is a consequence of this very, very primordial, from the earth aesthetic he was going for, where lots of bright colors and things wouldn't necessarily fit in. But it is still a consequence, and it is still something to be criticized, because people aren't going to look at the movie with knowing the history and being like, well, this is an artistic choice. Does it play into this? Yes, but he's doing it for this reason. They're going to be like, well, that's what ancient Greece looks like. And historians who have studied this are pissed because this is what they dedicate their life's work to, and to have someone ignore it, I can understand. That's annoying. That sucks. That's not fun. And I'm sorry. And then we also have classicists and literature lovers who have studied ancient Greek texts, including the Odyssey, and they see Nolan probably as someone who is going to uphold a very Western white version of the text, who is going to put the present moment onto it and blockbusterize this classic. He is not going to respect the original text and what it means. He is not going to look at ancient Greece and adapt the themes and meanings according to how the Odyssey was meant to be received in ancient Greece. He is not going to adapt the text with fidelity. He is not going to care for the original arcs of the story. To them, any deviation Nolan makes is a misunderstanding of the text, of the original characters. Anything that Nolan adds or excludes that doesn't tell the story of the original or enhance the themes and the message of the original is the same as like punching you in the gut. Then there are people who are fans of some other media about the Odyssey who like their version of the Odyssey best and see any version that does something different than their version as competition, or as something that makes their thing look bad, or something that can't be as good as their version because the person who made their favorite version already had the best take on the Odyssey. And it's like versions of Dracula. Everyone has their own favorite version of Dracula, and people will argue over which one is the best and which one understands the text and the characters the best. And then also some of the people have not read the original version of Dracula and they're all fighting. My point here is, with all these groups, the commonality between them is that they feel like the text is theirs. Whether that's because of white supremacy or actual years spent studying ancient Greece, or because you experienced a piece of media, whether it be the original Odyssey or some other take on the Odyssey, you think you have the right interpretation of what it means. How you experienced it is the right way to experience it, and you are the one who knows the truth of the text. And I understand, because sometimes hearing how someone else views a thing I like makes me want to strangle them. For example, it took me a long time to get around to listening to what anyone else had to say about Obsession, because I felt like my interpretation was the only right one. I felt like my experience and viewing was correct, and it was hard for me to let that go, especially because I find the movie deeply, really sad, and I had a lot of big feelings about it. And so hearing other people talk about it just made me mad for a while. But then I started listening to other people, and I found a lot of fascinating interpretations of the text, including this video essay that I'm going to put here about Obsession, because it was amazing. It's hard to let it go that your interpretation is just one in a sea of interpretations. The way we experience media is very personal. When we receive a text, it is received with everything we are, with all our experiences and understandings. And there are some texts that thread themselves around our soul. They feel like they speak to us in such a way that they are ours, that they understand us. And it's a very hard thing to see other people's interpretations, especially when you've put so much work into something and some fucking British guy goes, this is what I think. And it's like, you don't have the years of history, or you want to interpret this the way the text obviously is. You want any interpretation to be loyal to your version of the text and the way that you experienced it. And it's never going to happen because someone is different from you. To you, there is a purpose to reading the Odyssey, and the film must emulate that purpose. It should emulate what you believe the original text is saying. It should do what you want it to do, because you feel an ownership of the text, and Christopher Nolan's interpretation does shit, and inevitably will shit on your version of the text, and that sucks. And it is valid to say that you don't believe Nolan's version is a good interpretation of the myth. I don't think it is. For historical reasons, for textual reasons, for deep personal psychological reasons, any reason you have to say this isn't a valid interpretation of text, I support it, because I like discourse, and I think that's an interesting thing to talk about and gets us to talk about history and interpretation and reception. I don't like hearing when people say this isn't accurate and therefore it's bad. And I get being upset because, again, interpretation is a very impersonal thing, and then also some people are going to watch this and think that this is what the Odyssey was, and it's not. And that's not gonna matter to people, and that's annoying. But then you have to remember that people watched Obsession and thought that Bear did nothing wrong. We need to stop judging adaptations by their closeness to the source material because it nips interesting conversation about history and reception in the bud. The movie is never going to be the same as the book, the poem. It is, by nature, a different medium, made in a different time, by a different person. So it is its own piece of art. It is not a copy. Comparison between it and the original text can breathe insight into creative choices, and it makes for an engaging and exciting discussion, but it should not be the sole evaluative. And I wrote this fucking script. It is not the sole evaluative feature. I say sole because sometimes you could say, well, this character works in the book because X, but in the movie, X is cut, and it makes it hard to gather what their motivation is if you haven't read the source material. And I think critiques like that can be fun, and they think about the choices of the writers. I want to add, a historian's love for the text, a love for understanding the original ancient Greek, the context that it's in, and what it meant at the time are all valid and important things. And the movie cannot take away the time, research, and dedication you've put into studying the past. And now, the history you have worked to remember and preserve is being obscured or taken over by this big blockbuster film. And I won't ask you to trust that people are smart enough to understand that the poem and the film are different, because inevitably people won't do that. They'll say, I've watched the film, why do I need to read the original? And that is annoying. It can be heartbreaking to be told that, especially when it's a piece of art you really care about, a piece of art you love. So I'll frame it this way. It's hard for me to give up ownership of a thing. I'm doing the adaptation video about the Odyssey because I feel no ownership over the myth. But I love Anne of Green Gables. I was named after it, and I can't watch the TV series. I've heard it's great, and when people tell me it's great, I'm very happy for them because I'm happy they found a piece of art in a story they enjoyed. I don't tell them that I hate it or it's bad or I'm mad it exists, because I'm not. I know the writers had a story they wanted to tell. I know they saw something in Anne of Green Gables that I didn't see or didn't want to see. I say I am so in love with the book and its story. I can't fathom another interpretation. Something about the book feels like it's mine, like it's a part of me. And it is, but it is also a part of a lot of people in different ways, and their interpretations and what it means to them is different than what it means to me. But my copy is mine, and I'll share my thoughts about it freely. And their interpretation is theirs, and what sparks their creativity about it is different from mine. Now, granted, Anne of Green Gables isn't mixed up in as much cultural dialogue, discourse, and politics as the Odyssey is, but I'm just trying to get at that I understand the big feelings, and I'm not telling anyone not to feel ownership over something. I'm simply asking that either you say, no, simply, I do not want to think about the Odyssey. I don't want to engage with it because it's not going to be for me. You either say that, or you hear Christopher Nolan out, you judge the film on its own merits, and you see how the interpretation differs from yours. People will always misunderstand the text. People will always think they know more than they do. But that doesn't erase your work, because the people who are genuinely interested in learning the history will come and find you. Some people aren't, and I don't know how to get them interested. I have seen this movie inspire a lot of people to go read the Odyssey, and that's really exciting. And if you see someone who's going to pick up the Odyssey, guess what? You, who know about it and who have known all these things, get to talk to them about it and give them all the bits and pieces and information. And hopefully, if they're picking up the book and reading it, they'll want to hear what you have to say. I think it's fruitless to say adaptation is an imperfect copy of the original, that it suffers from generation loss. We should look at adaptation as a new piece of art. This is hard sometimes to do with Hollywood or anything on the scale. I saw many people calling this just another soulless Hollywood adaptation, chopping up the original for pieces that would work on the big screen. But this is not a soulless Hollywood adaptation. This is not made by a nameless machine. This is made by a director whose last film won Best Picture and who, at this point in his career, can do whatever the fuck he wants. He's not picking up whatever schlock the studio wants him to make. People aren't going to see this because it's the Odyssey, even though that's what's going on in my corner of the internet. People are going to see it because it's Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. And he likes to use IP and existing work, and he's going for spectacle. But anyone who calls this a soulless cash grab is discrediting Nolan as an artist and is also not engaging with the film. Nolan has adapted things before, most notably, obviously, Batman, but Memento was based on his brother's short story, and he changed literally almost everything about it. And that's his brother he had no fidelity towards. Although I think his brother is fine with it. I read an interview somewhere, but it's gone to me, and the book was an interlibrary loan, so if I try to get it back by the... whatever. It's better to look at its adaptation as inspired by another work. I like that The Lion King is inspired by Hamlet, and Clueless is inspired by Emma. I like Hadestown, and Natasha Peer and the Great Comet of 1812, and the hodgepodge that is Ghost Quartet. I don't know who gets to adapt stories, but I know that I like seeing how they are retold, how each new interpretation, adaptation doesn't replicate fully, but comments on the themes of the original. I do like straight up adaptations. I think the Hunger Games movies are great. I don't think, obviously they can't be fully faithful to the books, but they're pretty similar. I think Heated Rivalry, the TV show, is straight up an improvement of its source material, even though it takes a lot of dialogue from the original book. Interview with the Vampire, the movie, is a pretty straightforward adaptation, and I like it a lot. But I also really like the liberties that Interview with the Vampire took, and I have feelings about season 3 that will never see the light of day. No person reads the same work the same. No person gets the same thing out of a text. Any adapter is going to adapt the work how they see it, even if they make it as close to the original work as possible. The directors make choices. The props and costumes and hair and makeup and sound design and score and actors and cinematographer and editors all make choices. And sometimes those choices really do stray away from the original text. As a writer, I'm inspired by countless things, and I've gotten criticism for not using the myth as it was originally written before. I base a lot of my work off of images or ideas I see in other pieces of media. But to be fair, I think when we hear book to movie adaptation, we automatically think we need to read the book, or in this case, poem, to have a better understanding of the story. And that is what I think a weak adaptation does. There are adaptations that rely on your knowledge of the original text, that like to Easter egg and hint to what things mean for the people who know its source. There are numerous adaptations that rely on the book to get you to where it needs to go. They cut around things, but then they don't make up for it by explaining things. And this is why I appreciate parts of Nolan's adaptation. Nolan chose to adapt a work that a lot of people know, and that comes with people entering it with varying degrees of understanding about what things should be and what the references are. But Nolan doesn't overly rely on reference because he changes things up. He explains what his concept of Zinnia is. He makes the gods primordial and mysterious. They speak in the land, the earth, a baby's cry. He makes them a lot less helpful to Odysseus, even the ones that are on his side. He explains the god as the ancient forces of the world. He defines who Agamemnon is to the story, and Clytemnestra and Helen, and all the characters we need to know, except for Calypso, really, who is my sore spot of the film, and I don't think that what she's doing is properly explained, and I do think it relies a little bit on the source material, and that does annoy me. But for the most part, Nolan defines his own world, and I genuinely believe an adaptation fails when it cuts things and doesn't add things that help with its cohesion. The narrative must be able to stand on its own two legs, and it must be legible for someone who has never read the source material. Because again, it's in a new medium. It is its own piece of art. When it doesn't think of itself that way, it is going to fail. Insert name argues that adaptation is more faithful to the source material when the world it's being adapted in is stable. When things are unstable, the adaptation gets shaken up and is different. It's basically like, the world hasn't changed that much since the Hunger Games books are released. Let's make the movies, and the movies pretty much stay similar because they're written to be received by the same person. So the question becomes, how do you translate a work that is 2,000 years old? How does it resonate with you, and how will that be different than the way it resonated with the people before you? That is the issue, right? We can't read the Odyssey like the ancient Greeks. We have to situate it in our context, understand it through our lens, compare it and situate it to what we know. We weren't the ones intended to receive the original story, and it's very hard to receive the story as it was originally meant, which is by a bard in ancient Greece. There's no text in front of us. We are listening and comprehending ancient Greek. Nolan could have chosen to adapt the Odyssey so the original themes of the story are more prevalent to us. He would have maybe pissed some people off, but they would understand that he kept the themes intact. He could have adapted the Odyssey like this, and I think there are a good amount of people who would have respected that, who would have said, well, of course, you got to translate it to a modern audience. That's why we have Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet with Mercutio in drag. Fantastic choice, by the way, Baz Luhrmann. You don't need my compliment. That was, I think, made in 1999 or something like that. But Nolan doesn't choose to adapt the story with the original themes intact. He decides that he wants to have a conversation with those themes, but he has different musings on them, and he has different takes and different interpretations than the original source material. I don't think Nolan misunderstands the original Odyssey. He might. I don't know. But I think he saw something in the text, some thematic idea, and wanted to say his own thing about those themes. To say he misinterpreted the text asks in the first place, was he trying to interpret it the way that it was written? Because to me, he wasn't. And I think that's okay. Because again, adaptation is fundamentally its own piece of art, and it's inspired by the piece of art that came before it. And that was going to be where I left this part of the argument. Fidelity doesn't matter. It isn't useful in looking at someone else's work because everyone else has a different interpretation of the thing, and shouldn't we judge what they are trying to say with their interpretation? But then I thought, isn't Nolan taking ownership of something that isn't his? Isn't he bastardizing the Odyssey? Isn't he westernizing the Odyssey and washing out the original culture? Interpreting it using his own culture? Isn't he taking ownership of a culture that time and time again has been pilfered from? Isn't he appropriating the Odyssey? I mean, Rome appropriated it first, but then the British did. I believe the French and the Germans did, and then the Americans did. And we, Americans, decided that we were the successors of ancient Greek cultures, not the Greeks. And this film erases the original culture and misinterprets a lot of it. The concept of zinnia, Greek hospitality, is turned into Zeus's law, and it's like a fundamental primordial law of letting people into your home, sharing food and drink with them that shouldn't be disobeyed, instead of, you know, being the Greek concept that it is. And that's one minor example. Is Nolan's The Odyssey erasing culture? Can it do that? I mean, I'd like to believe that people will see the costumes and the story and understand that it is not the original ancient Greek story or what ancient Greece looked like, but I know that won't happen because I know that there are people out there that just look and see, ooh, big movie. You can experience art however you want, and that is a point that I'm trying to make in this video, and that everyone has their own interpretation of a thing, and I need to be okay with that. So then the question is, should we appropriate the Odyssey? Are we allowed? And are we allowed to because it has become a part of our culture? And by we, I'm referring to me and Nolan and any milquetoast white person out there. Because, you know, we're taught about the Odyssey from a very young age, because our founding fathers built America on neoclassical values, because Britain, I don't actually know what's going on in Britain fully. They did steal a bunch of ancient artifacts from Greece and still refuse to give it back by saying that you can't take care of it, we can, and also this is our culture now, or whatever. So is the Odyssey ours? Can we say something about it? Or is Nolan appropriating and erasing ancient Greek culture? Would something like Spartacus or the 300 be acceptable to adapt because they are history? Is Epic the Musical okay? And are the works of Madeline Miller and all the other adaptations of the myth appropriation? Or are they different because they don't call themselves the Odyssey? Are we erasing the culture? Are we rewriting it? Should we give up the project entirely? Is something like O Brother, Wherefore Art Thou in the same category of the Odyssey? Would it be okay if Nolan more aligned his story with what ancient Greece looked like? It's its problem that it recreates ancient Greece in an inaccurate way that reproduces aesthetics that are white supremacist. How do we contend with this? I don't have an answer, but I do have something. I think something like this becomes more complicated when I look at something like Emerald Fennell's adaptation of Wuthering Heights, which refuses to make Heathcliff a person of color because Emerald Fennell couldn't imagine him that way. Which is a crazy thing to say. Unlike Nolan's Odyssey, Fennell's adaptation is not good on its own, nor as an adaptation. I think it could be way less egregious if she said this was inspired by Wuthering Heights, but renamed the characters or something, or just had a different title for the movie. I guess Nolan could have done this too. He could have had a different name for the movie. He could have named the characters different things and said, this is inspired by the Odyssey. But I do believe that Nolan engages with the text in the way that Fennell doesn't. Fennell is writing Wattpad fan fiction that doesn't really comment on things well. Nolan, I think, actually has something interesting to say. And also, I hate to compare Christopher Nolan, the film bro, with Emerald Fennell, because it makes it seem like I hate women. And I just have really complicated feelings about this one specific woman. I think that generally, it is okay to be inspired by work. It's okay to want to engage with art that came before you. I don't know if taking the title of it for yourself is great. I understand that Nolan's Odyssey is not the original Odyssey. He's not reproducing it clearly, but he has stuff he wanted to say about it. I think you can be inspired by anything and everything. I think if you say, yeah, this was inspired by this thing, it doesn't have to be from your culture. It doesn't have to be from this time and place. I get inspired by everything I've ever seen, and I think that's fair. Then it's your prerogative to create a good piece of art that resonates with you, rather than trying to reproduce things you don't understand. You can be like, this is the story I resonated with, this is how I resonated with it, this is inspired by it, it's not that story. I think, again, most people find that generally acceptable. We do have to reckon with the aesthetics Nolan reproduced and the way he chose to retell this story and what he saw in the story.
I've tried to record this several times, but I can't figure out how I want to say this. What I will say is, yes, Nolan reproduces a clean, white aesthetic that has been put onto ancient Greece to uphold white supremacy for centuries at this point. And that is not good. It shouldn't be ignored, even if it wasn't intentional, because I think it is so normalized at this point that the problem is it's not intentional for most people, and yet it still happens. But the problem with art in general is that it is made, especially films, is that they are made and produced by people who work and operate within a system of patriarchal whiteness, and they're produced, especially Nolan's films, you could say the target audience is white men, and we have to live with what that means. We have to talk about how reception and adaptation are informed by the people who produce the adaptation and by the people who receive the adaptation. That is something we have to deal with. So anytime a piece of art is reproduced or made for a certain audience, the audience and the person making it come into the work with their own biases and with their own culture and identities, and those culture and identities are messy, is the best way, or maybe the kindest way to put that. And that's what I mean. Anyways, I don't think the transition to the next section is going to work now, but we're just going to go with it.
Before we look at how Nolan talks to the Odyssey, we have to look at this film as its own thing. I don't think Christopher Nolan's Odyssey was as perfect as some of its lovers say it is, but I really enjoyed it. I think the third act made it for me because the second one got a little repetitive, even though I saw critiques more so with the first one. Anyway, here's a brief recap because I genuinely hate writing recaps. Odysseus changes the tide of a 10-year war that takes place between the Greeks and the Trojans by hiding his men in a wooden horse that is a gift from Athena. His messenger, Sinon, is killed when the Trojans come to investigate the horse and accept the gift. Sinon still manages to tell them that it's a gift, so they drag the horse into the city. There, Odysseus's men wait for nightfall. Once the sun sets, they leave the horse and ransack the city and open the gates so the other men who disappeared from the shores to make it seem like the war was over came back to be let in the city. They ransack the city, they slaughter a bunch of people, and they win the war. 10 years later, Odysseus still hasn't arrived home. But his house is filled with suitors who take advantage of Zeus's law, which is when a guest comes to your home, you treat them as they're a member of your household. They expect Penelope's, Odysseus' wife's, hospitality. They eat her food and drink her wine and expect that she will marry one of them because her husband is clearly dead. But she waits for him, and she waits for people to carry word of him. She knows when they are telling the truth and when they are lying because she gave him a little pin of Athena and she asks if he was carrying anything. And if they say yes, he was carrying this little pin, she knows they're telling the truth. Her son, Telemachus, is fed up with the suitors who pick on him, who use up everything around them, who consume him and want to consume his mother. So he embarks on a journey to find word of his father. Meanwhile, well, sort of in the recent past, Odysseus is on an island with Calypso, who is, I know that she is a Titan. Is it really explained who she is? No, she's just a woman in kind of makeshift clothing. He eats lotus flowers and has forgotten his past, but it seems like his memories are finally coming back to him. He recounts his trials and tribulations that he faced after he and his men set sail for home once they won the war. So we have two framing devices for most of this film. Telemachus is told stories of his father from bards and from the people around him, most notably the king Menelaus, and then the second is Odysseus remembering his story of his own life. All of this is happening while Penelope is pressured to take a husband in real time because there are sea people who have been pillaging the people of the land. They disrespect Zeus's law of hospitality. Odysseus's adventures are primordial. He traverses these large, haunting lands with monsters and strange magic. They are filled with grief and mutiny. Their journey home is filled with monsters and gods we do not see besides Athena, blowing them off their course, taking control of the wind so they can't get home. And Odysseus tries over and over again to defy them and their will. He does not believe in trusting them, in trusting these primordial things. This Odysseus cares for his crew and cares for people, and his journey does not harden him. He is defeated from the moment they set off. Eventually, Odysseus regains his memories and realizes he has to go home, but he doesn't know how. What Athena tells him is he finally has to trust in the gods. So he ties himself to a raft and he prays that Zeus will take him home, and it works. Then he has to find his son Telemachus because, surprise, surprise, the suitors are trying to kill Telemachus. They meet up, but Telemachus doesn't know it's him yet. They go back home, he figures it out that that's his dad. Penelope's being like forced to take on a suitor, so she issues a challenge. Odysseus is the one who completes the challenge, then he kills all the men. Then he's like, we gotta go because I didn't bury the bodies of my men correctly. We have to go to the far out seas. Telemachus is in charge now. He's gonna be a great king. And the movie ends. We'll get into a more nice ending of the film in a second. Overall, here are my thoughts. First of all, the aesthetic of the film actually worked for me. I expected it to be the part that I hated. Sometimes Nolan's films are too dark. I'm a man. But this was breathtaking to look at, and there's some folk horror-esque elements about it that I really liked. It makes the world seem old and inhabited by things we cannot see. There is magic embedded in the world, and it's deeply rooted in the land and the wind and the creatures that inhabit it. There are frames, the men eating the cattle for one, that are haunting and beautiful at the same time. I do long to see an ancient Greece with full color on the big screen one day, but I understand why Nolan's film had to look this way. It had to show the gods as something spooky. It had to be primordial. And so its colors are very much earth tones and things that are muted and things that are a little colorless. And I like that. Despite myself, I like that. The music is also fantastic. It is eerie, it's tense, it's haunting. I like the framing device of this film. There is a lot of story to get through, so having a story that is sometimes sung, sometimes told, really works because it's a really long journey and we gotta hit the highlights, right? We can't have everything in it. I don't like Calypso's character because apparently she loves Odysseus for years and she's been giving him the lotus flower, so he's like, his memories has been going, but literally there's a part of himself that like fights through the memory fog and has started to be like, oh, it's time to go home now. And she's like, well, I guess he fought through the fog, which means he wants to go home, so I guess I'm gonna let him. I don't know if I like that, but I like how the stories end up being told. My favorite thing about this framing is that we get the story of the Trojan War a few times, and we don't get the full scene until the third act. It has already become a story that people are telling and telling over again. It's the great triumph of the hero Odysseus. It is the words of the Odyssey, but we only get Nolan's version in the third act. Telemachus, Penelope, and Antonius are fantastic, and when they were gone, mostly in the middle of the film, I was kind of like, bring them back. I love this drama. Anne Hathaway gives an amazing performance. You see how much Penelope has hardened herself and how much love she has had to hold in herself while she turns herself to ice. Like, she cannot be warm and soft. She has to maneuver and manipulate these men while pretending to be warm and soft because they want her home and they take advantage of her. She has to keep the peace while also rule. She loves her son and her husband so much. She would do anything for them. But there are things she says to Telemachus that are ice cold, and you can tell that it is just to protect him, and you can tell that in some ways it's not enough for him anymore. And I think that tension is a very fascinating choice to have throughout this movie, because it gives, first of all, love a character flaw. Second of all, it shows how the love is there despite a more complicated relationship. So this drama gives action in real time. Since all of Odysseus's things are happening in the past, we have real-time tension. We have a reason we need him to get home now, this instant. I saw people say Penelope was being too much of a girl boss because she wanted the throne. No, she is rightly pointing out that she has been on the throne for 20 years, and it hurts that no one respects her. Like, no one was going to respect her, but imagine dealing with it for 20 years, and you're in charge, and everyone's like, you're not in charge, and you need to marry one of us. I think that's interesting. I think the way that her heart has had to harden is actually kind of heartbreaking, because she still loves, and it is still so deep in her bones how much she loves Odysseus and Telemachus. I don't like that Telemachus killed anyone. In the end, he kills one person to help his dad win a fight. I do like that Odysseus told him to back off and not engage in the fight, because I think you lose a part of yourself when you have to kill someone, and Odysseus is very much aware of that, and so he's willing to continue to corrupt himself and then go away because that's what he has to do. So yeah, I don't like that Telemachus killed anyone. I like that Agamemnon was this shadowy evil force akin to Darth Vader. Did I think it was a little stupid? Maybe just a little bit, but I also think that it was interesting to have this immovable evil, this villain that Odysseus serves under. And because he is made to look like that, it's so clear that Odysseus is under him. I like that this is Agamemnon's war. He scapegoats Helen, and for the 5 seconds Lupita Nyong'o is on my screen, she devours the scenery. He asks Telemachus to apologize to Penelope for the war, for everything done in her name, and Telemachus doesn't, but well, I don't know. I like that Helen was made by everyone to feel guilty, and like this was her fault, when Odysseus and even the other men knew that this was Agamemnon's war and knew that he was just finding an excuse to go to war. And Odysseus and all these other men still went and they still murdered and killed, and now people are singing about them like they're being heroic when none of it was ever heroic or good in the first place. And the person who was leading it was this big shadowy evil figure that everyone just bent the knee to. And it also makes Agamemnon's warning to Odysseus odd, being like, "Oh, don't trust your wife, she might kill you. Sir, you killed your daughter." The second act of this film is the weakest. I think Telemachus and Penelope add a lot, and most of these are Odysseus' trials at sea. And they're kind of samey, all these trials. They have great imagery, like every bit and piece looks amazing. It's just that a lot of these trials that they go on make Odysseus look stupid. He does things and his secondhand man goes, "We shouldn't do that." Odysseus is like, "Yeah, but I'm going to anyways." And then the thing he does usually goes wrong. He doesn't care about the gods when the rest of his crew believes in them. This makes sense, but I think the tension and just his dynamic with the crew in general is not great, because you would expect a level of camaraderie between them that is just never there. I think it should have been a gradual progression of Odysseus losing their trust. That would have been a lot better, because that shows that they're clued into the fact that something is wrong with him, and instead of trying to help him, they go, "You are the reason we're not getting home because you don't want to go home." And I think that should have been more of a gradual realization. And because it would also show that Odysseus genuinely cares about these men, right? Because he doesn't want them to die. He's told again and again that the gods are only going to let him live. And he's like, "Then I'm going to defy the gods," which is interesting, but it doesn't seem like he cares about these guys. It seems like he thinks they're awful. Also, Odysseus makes stupid choices, which is fine on its own, but we are told in the film that he's really smart. And it does make more sense when you later find out he didn't want to go home. But at the time, I was like, "You're literally the smartest of the Greeks. Why are you doing this?" I also thought the Circe scene was strange. I love that she distrusted them and was like, "These are bad men. They're going to pillage and rape and hurt." Because she's right to think that. But she also just lets them go when Odysseus threatens her bird, who is also her sister, and says, because he says, they all just want to go home. That's all they want to do. When earlier, we literally saw them pillage a village. I do believe, however, that in this moment, Odysseus gains a bit of his honor back because he handles the situation without violence. He tries to make a deal with Circe. He tries to understand her situation, and this seems to try to calm her down when she is afraid. And he listens to her message about the gods, and he isn't so outwardly scornful of her. I also don't like that she goes, "Well, they'll die anyway, so I can just, let them go now. They're gonna die." And she kind of tells him that, and he's like, "I'll defy the gods." I don't know. In the third act of the film, Odysseus recovers his memory and he ties himself to a raft and trusts the gods will bring him home. This is his act of faith in the universe, something that he hasn't done the whole time. The act of trust is what carries him home. The moment comes after Odysseus chooses to accept his past. He chooses to remember it, and he recounts it to Calypso. He has spent years forgetting, staying away. But after this time, he is finally able to relive his past with her, to remember what happened, and to stop hiding, and then he is actually able to face the gods. He has to face what he's done, and then he can face judgment. That is interesting, and I think it shows how ashamed he is of what he did, and how he was running from fate because he knows in a way that he deserves to be punished. Through all of Act 2, I couldn't help compare it to the Odyssey. I didn't understand why Odysseus was so defeated, why he wouldn't want to go home, because I hadn't yet seen his version of the Trojan War, and so I was basing who he would be off of my conceptions of the myth. We have watched a man run from fate, destiny, and his actions throughout the film. That's what the monster encounters are really about. And he has a little farther to go. He rescues Telemachus, who is in the middle of almost being assassinated in a temple of Athena by some men Antonius hired. Telemachus wants to honor the dead, but Odysseus disagrees. Odysseus disagrees. In that way, we see how Telemachus holds on to something no one else holds on to. A respect for others and respect for gods and the traditions. Odysseus travels home in disguise and tells Penelope he is Sinon. I forgot to explain this. So Odysseus feels responsible for killing Sinon because Sinon was lied to at the beach because he had to believe that Troy had gone and he'd been deserted. So with that the Trojans would be like, oh yeah, okay, of course it's a gift. And that got Sinon killed when Odysseus promised he'd protect him because Sinon went to war as a very young boy. Also, we learned that Sinon was manipulated into trading places with Antinous in the war. They had like switched their lots. Odysseus as Sinon says, oh yeah, I ran into Odysseus. And he kind of insinuates that Odysseus might not want to come home. And Penelope says he would always come back to me, that he would do anything to come back to me. And Odysseus asks, what if he lost his way? And then the best scene in the film happens. Troy. Odysseus narrates how he and his men brutally slaughtered the people of Troy. He wanted them to wait until there was no moon in the sky so they wouldn't see the ships come. They massacred men, women, and children, and they used the gods to do it. They used Athena to do it. They gave Troy a horse and said it was a gift from Athena. They took advantage of the people's trust in the gods, of a peace offering, and then they senselessly killed as many as they could. And it was Odysseus's plan. He quotes, to burn Troy was to burn the world entire, which is a reverse of to save one man is to save the world entire, which comes from Judaism, which obviously is anachronistic. So he's quoting something that is in the past, but everything kind of comes together because they all exist now when Nolan is making the film. Does that make sense? So he's quoting that because he has something to say about it. So we'll get back to it in a second. Odysseus broke a law. He broke a trust, and now that it's broken, people are fearful, because if this trust can be broken, if people can use the gods to be violent and awful, why would they trust the gods anymore? Now that he and his men and many others are pillaging their way across the sea. Of course, this is not just Odysseus's decision. There are thousands of soldiers that chose to follow the plan, that senselessly slaughtered people for the overlord Agamemnon. But Odysseus is the one who suggested to use the gods. And in the scene, we see Athena, the statue and the goddess, maybe just another innocent girl, beheaded, disregarded, while men go on senselessly killing in her name. That moment, I think, is when Odysseus broke. And his victory broke him, not the journey home. His plan, the destruction he caused, was his undoing. And now we see why the gods are angry with him and his crew. He upset the balance of things. Well, not him alone, obviously, but men did. Men took advantage of the gods, but he, at least, recognized that. The moment it was over, he ran from that recognition. Odysseus had to come home to make it right, because he realized that it was wrong. And once he was able to accept what he did and accept judgment, he was able to come home to start the steps of making things right. And so the film ends with him doing that. First of all, there's slaughter. He has to get justice for Sinon, like he promised after he failed him. The men in Odysseus's home are horrible. And so they get their reckoning, and we get an action sequence. And then Odysseus leaves Ithaca to honor the dead, because that's what is right to do. He trusts the gods and goes towards a horizon to the west, to places unknown. He leaves Ithaca to Telemachus, to someone who believes in goodness, in kindness, and reciprocity. And this made me really like the movie, because this is not the original Odysseus's arc. This is not what the original text means, but it's a fascinating interpretation, and it clicked with me why this had to be Nolan's Odyssey and not some random classical themed movie. Adaptations talk to each other. Art is a conversation. Each new piece is an entry in that conversation. Nolan here is preoccupied with a lot of things: God, faith, honor, guilt, morality. And he chooses to explore that through a text that casts its hero as a devotee of the gods. A man who is quick and clever and always deceiving all his woodland kin, and understands the gods. a man who is a liar, but an honorable one. That's the original Odysseus. That's not Nolan's Odysseus. Nolan takes that man and makes him a little aimless and a little dumb. Some comparisons make Odysseus look stupid, and he looks stupid in parts of the film regardless. I think Nolan's Odyssey doesn't set Odysseus apart as much as I think some people could read it as. He is not the sole person responsible for men being awful, but he is a man, and like many men, he bastardized the gods. In Nolan's version, Odysseus becomes more common in Nolan's version because he is one man who did this, but a lot of other men also choose to do it. He is just the one who realizes that it's wrong, which is individualist, but I appreciate that his actions are not his alone. They seek to understand a morality of men in general, which I think is interesting when you consider like a collectivist reading of the Odyssey, where Odysseus represents specific values and ideas of ancient Greece. But the specific reason that this had to be the Odyssey is because of the sacking of Troy. The film is Nolan's take on that day, so it couldn't be another story. The image of the horse literally is shown again and again. It binds the narrative together. The characters live in a world defined by that day. This is the day the war effectively ended. This is the day Odysseus became a hero, and it broke him. This is the day he could finally come home. The Trojan horse is also one of the stories that I don't want to say everyone knows, because I don't know what everyone knows, but I will say it is one story almost every American knows. It is one that is taught in the classroom, and I would imagine it's the same in Britain. Nolan saw that horse, the celebrated cleverness, the story we tell again and again and again, and interrogated the violence of it, interrogated the lie. He saw the hero, the legend created from it, and as Nolan does, he wanted to think about the real take of it. I don't always need realism in my stories, but that is Nolan's bread and butter, realism in unrealistic, impossibly vast worlds. Nolan is not the first to question Greek myth or even the Odyssey and spin a more realistic, more grounded web of the story. He won't be the last, but he centers the blame around Odysseus, who, compared to many of the Greek fighters in the Trojan War, was usually seen as just a decent dude. Like, he's smart. He loves his wife, even though he cheats on her. And he was violent, but who wasn't? Agamemnon was more violent. But you know, Odysseus is violent, but he didn't start the war. But he made a promise to go to war. So he will. So he does. And Nolan's Odysseus isn't a morally gray, ultra-violent good guy. He is a man who has to reconcile his place in the universe. He's a man who has seen what happens when trust is betrayed, and how goodness is something that can be taken advantage of, and how he did that. He is a man who is seduced by that choice and has to learn how to become good again and to trust the universe that God is fundamentally a good thing, a beautiful thing, that he can have faith after he broke trust. I'm not religious. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that messaging, but it is what the story, at least to me, is saying. So take that as you will. What I love about the Odyssey, the original, not Nolan's, is that it is a journey of a man who will do anything to get back to his family. A man who faces punishment from the gods because they chose sides in a war. A man who faces great horrors, who watches his men die despite it all just to get home. And I like that Nolan asks, what if the war changed him in a way so fundamentally he didn't think he could come home? Because that's war. Odysseus feels guilt. He feels like he has lost his honor. And you may think you have to lose honor to win, but that means you lose a part of yourself. Nolan's Odyssey can't span the whole story. It chooses one moment, one choice, and builds its entire narrative around it. It chooses one thing we know that we're familiar with and asks, well, what if Odysseus reacted differently to it? It's asking a question about the text it's directly inspired by, although it tells a different story. It deviates from it. And I love that because it interrogates the myth, the legend, the song, the heroic deed of Odysseus and says, this was not good. The gods do not take his side, not even Athena, really. She's there almost as an extension of his guilt. Nolan's The Odyssey plays with our knowledge about the song, about the poem, of a good deed, of the story everyone knows, and he refuses to let it be easy. He refuses to gloss over what winning a war means. I'm not religious, and I don't necessarily agree with giving yourself up to God and some of the very Christian religious aspects of this film, because I don't know if the world is fundamentally good or bad, or if God is in control of our actions. But I do know that people use God to justify their shitty behavior, and that is what I saw in this film. Nolan's Odyssey contends with with the nature of stories. The Odyssey was sung. It's an oral tradition told over and over again, and you have to imagine its meaning changes. Its meaning varies with each retelling, with different reflections and stresses. And the Odyssey film tries to contend with the meaning getting lost, with the parts falling away, with people making the same mistakes, with the sharp edges that get dulled when a story is told and told again and made to seem more heroic than it might have actually been if this was a real war. And it cynically says that this will happen again, that people will take advantage of the gods again, of people's trust and goodwill, and be deceitful and cause a cycle of harm and violence to start again. That it says cynically that Odysseus' song will be sung and made into heroic myth, and the true tragedy, the true weight of it, will be forgotten, and people will not learn the lesson of honor. They will not learn about the horrors of war and how it fundamentally breaks and changes a man and makes it so he cannot come home until he reckons with what he has done and the horrors that have been inflicted because of what he's done. Instead, this will all happen again. And that is the Odyssey in the way people view it as this sacred text, a thing not to be critical of, but to consume it as the peak of literature. There are people, again, the white supremacists critiquing this film, who do not want to see the original deviated in any way, while the Odyssey is being reproduced as a piece of propaganda. In conclusion, the Odyssey film is not the text. It's not trying to be, but it doesn't get away with its adaptation cleanly. It still does, even if unintentional, appropriate ancient Greek text and use aesthetics that have historically whitewashed Greece and the cultures of the Mediterranean. While we should view it as its own thing, it would be wrong of me to not point out the myths and receptions of ancient Greece that it reproduces. You will receive a film with your own context, with your own understandings and culture, and that includes the ideals passed down from the whole white patriarchal culture we in America and Britain and in Europe all live under. And I think reading the Odyssey, of Nolan's The Odyssey like that, with that context, is still taking it as it is, because it is reproducing those things, and that is the context it is situated in, whether it wants to be or not. That is not me being mad about changes in the source material, or mad about the historical inaccuracy. It's just something that we have to contend with, that this movie does. We also have to contend with a conservative reading of this film, of giving yourself to God, of rugged individualism. Aspects of the film lean into that conservative American classroom reading of the text. But there is a cynicism in Nolan's The Odyssey that is not radical in a political sense, but that does judge heroes and power. At least that is how I read it. I could be wrong, I could be putting my own biases into the text, but that's how I choose to interpret his interpretation of the Odyssey. What Nolan's Odyssey is, what it's trying to do, is be in conversation with the text. It is not an accurate adaptation of the Odyssey, but it couldn't go by another name because it wants to be connected to it. It wants to converse with it and pull new meanings and new ideas from the text. And isn't that cool? Isn't that amazing that art can inspire? More art inspires conversation, that art can resonate with us in new and interesting ways across time and culture and place. That is the magic of adaptation. The Odyssey is one of many stories that is adapted and adapted and adapted, that is retold and is resung, and that is added to and subtracted to. From art, we create art that we create art from. The Odyssey will inspire other filmmakers and other artists to create things, and it won't be generation loss, it will be generation. And while that is inspiring and awesome, that doesn't mean that I think it's a perfect text or that it does everything right. Naturally, there are more problems with it than, say, retelling Cinderella. It is one of those stories that is told over and over again. And so we will have to contend with it and what it reproduces every time it is told. Thank you so much for watching. My voice is gone. This is the longest video I've ever filmed, and I'm tired. I really appreciate everyone who watched my last video. This is going to be really different from that. And I'm sorry I haven't posted in months. I have a job. I had a job. Today was my last day today because I'm going to grad school. So my life is about to get a lot more crazy. And if any of my future students see this, yes, I'm wearing a bed sheet. Make sure to subscribe or unsubscribe because a song cannot be resung unless we do the cycle. So you must do one to do the other, and the cycle repeats itself over and over again. So if you watch one of my videos, you subscribe. Then you watch another, you unsubscribe. Then you subscribe again. Or you stay subscribed forever and ever and ever. And we can be besties, and this can be parasocial. Actually, it will not be. That scares me so greatly. More than you could possibly imagine. Okay, I'm out now. Bye!